Hi, I'm Kurt from Kurt's Auto, and this is my 1991 Chevy S10 that is powered by a 472 cubic inch Cadillac engine from a 69 Fleetwood. It's kind of a whole bunch of different car parts kind of thrown together, and mostly a tube chassis that I made from scratch. So I have yet to hear this car actually run. I got it started enough to say that the distributor is in and timed correctly, but I've never actually ran it with an oil pressure gauge on it because there is no fuel system or cooling system at the moment. I have the radiator now. I need to put the thermostat housing and find an upper radiator hose. I have the lower radiator hose fabricated. And my goal for this first part of starting back on this project, because it's been so long that I haven't worked on it, I want to hear it run. I have yet to actually hear this engine run, and it has been, probably 13 or 14 years ago since this motor has actually been running. I've obviously gone through it, and I just put the cylinder heads back on it right before I sold my machine shop last year. So it is pretty fresh as far as the rebuild on it, but we definitely have to get it to first have any kind of an electrical system, because I'll show you what I'm working with here. I took a steering column and I kind of fabricated my own steering shaft here. And as far as the wiring harness goes, this is what I've got. The factory stuff coming out of the harness here. These main wires up in here are for the ignition switch. So I do believe that I am going to wire it up to a key. However, I may just put push button in it because it might be easier. We're going to do a complete and total wiring system on the car. Pretty sure I can find the S10 fuse box, but I haven't seen it in a number of years and I don't really even know where to look. It might be in my attic of my house. Anyway, I have a 20-gallon fuel cell that is brand new and ready to go in. It's been sitting in the box for a few years. These parts are off of my 65 Catalina and my Sunbird. I have to get those out of here. Make sure my air tank fits for the suspension, which happens to be a propane tank that I welded a drain onto the bottom of. For right now, I'm gonna get all this stuff cleaned out of here, figure out what I have to do to wire up some kind of an ignition switch, either off of the key or a push button, and I wanna be able to hear this thing turn over. Before, what I did was I just kind of had a couple jumper leads, and this was my push button start to roll the engine over. But again, all I did was set the distributor in, make sure it was timed, poured a little fuel in it. I actually want to hook a fuel line to that carburetor and make sure this thing's actually going to run correctly. I also kind of have the radiator still in its bag. I'm going to get that pulled out of there, find a thermostat, and get that done. So I've cleaned it all off and got all the stuff out of the inside so it looks less like it's abandoned. However, I did not find a couple important things. I am missing the alternator bracket, and I'm missing the thermostat housing that I expected to find inside the car, and it was not. Don't remember where those parts would be. They might get lucky, and they might be in a Suburban in my backyard. Otherwise, they're in a storage shed. Either way, I'm going to have to look for those when it's light outside because it's dark out now. But I did manage to kind of get everything cleaned up here so you can kind of see what's actually going on. There's still some scrap pieces of metal. Interior floor is all going to be made out of sheet aluminum. Either rivet or glue this in with epoxy. The transmission tunnel will be steel for protection. Same thing with over the drive shaft. I don't know if I'm going to make it all out of aluminum, but they'll definitely be reinforced, boxed with steel, like caging, and then maybe I'll put aluminum sheeting over it with a safety loop over the drive shaft. The gas tank obviously will go in the center here. The batteries are going to go over here, and then these are the air compressors that I haven't quite figured out exactly where I'm going to mount them, but I have two of these to fill up this propane cylinder, and that's what I'm going to use for my air suspension. So it's pretty close to a functioning vehicle. There's definitely a lot of other little pieces of metal that have to be welded together, and there's zero electronics in it whatsoever. I do have the battery cable ran from the starter. This is going to be the feed wire that runs to the starter. And then this is going to be the alternator's charging wire and the wire that runs to the ignition. So this will be the ground wire, which should be pretty thick. Motor should have no problem turning over with that heavy cable. The upper radiator hose, like I said, I don't know where the thermostat housing is, but I have to make that yet. I kind of put together a lower hose with a splice in the center that reduces the hose size, and I think that's going to work really well. Yeah, I'm extremely excited to get this thing running. The glass is just sitting in here temporarily. We'll take that out before I do any welding, that way I don't damage it. And then I do have a couple different options for rear windows down here. There's one that's just a solid tinted piece of glass, and then there's another one that has a sliding window in it. I don't know which one I'm going to put in yet. With all this weight behind the rear axle, I think there's going to be enough torque in this thing that I should be able to adjust the suspension to get a lot of traction. I think, yeah, this thing should pull wheelies and lift the front tires off the ground. That's actually my hope for the entire truck. That's my goal, is to have enough torque out of it that I can kind of just tromp on the gas and get the front tires to pick up. So we'll see if that actually happens. I know how much power this engine made in the Cadillac that I took it out of, and it was impressive. For how heavy that car was, it really did move. And with how light this is and how low of gear that rear end is, and with 4 tires that big, I really think this thing's going to have enough traction just to kind of pick the whole front end up. I have no idea what it weighs. As soon as I get it running, we'll take it down to Earlville, because that'll probably be the safest place to actually test drive it, down the drag strip. And we'll see what it weighs on the scale out there once I actually get it done. I know the rear end's probably 1,000 pounds if I have both dual wheels on there, because I kept the massive drums because, well, the brake shoes were brand new. And so for getting rear brakes, it cost me a set of wheel cylinders to purchase. Front brakes, I have nothing in there yet, so we're gonna have to get calipers and all that stuff. And I still have no master cylinder, but we'll put line locks on it, and we're gonna make this thing a ton of fun. All right, so what I've decided to do is I'm gonna use the original ignition switch to crank the engine and start it and have it be the shutoff. It just makes sense. This block is going to go on the firewall underneath the engine compartment, where I'm going to connect the alternator. This heavier, like, I don't even know what gauge this is. It's like 6 gauge wire. And these 2 wires with this fusible link are going to run to the 2 red wires of the ignition. From there, I'll be able to have my crank wire and my ignition feed for the distributor. And pretty much that's all that there is on this car. Well, I guess the air suspension, but I'll probably put that on a toggle switch. But should be a really simple setup and keep all the wiring really nice and clean. And this is what I'm going to use to make it all work. All right, so what I've done is I've hooked my booster pack to the cable that I plan, well, that runs to here. I have my fusible links running into my ignition, and now I'm going to test the wiring and make sure that I have everything I need to make the engine and everything work. All right, so I'm grounded to the transmission case, and with the key off, none of these wires are hot. So light doesn't light up on any of them. Now if I go to accessory, which would be like the radio circuit, that's going to be my brown wire. Yep. So brown wire's hot. None of the other ones are. And that's with the key turned backwards, which then if I turn it forward, it should still be hot, but then shut off when I go to start it. So that's going to be your accessory wire. The pink should be ignition on and on when I'm cranking. The orange is going to be a second ignition, which is also on, but off when I'm cranking. So you got to make sure you get the right wire connected. So the orange one actually turns off. That would be what you would use for your blower motor or other circuits that you don't want running while you're trying to crank the engine. So you have to make sure the distributor is hooked up to the pink wire So that way, while the key's turning to start, it's sending power to the distributor. And then of course the yellow wire has no power until you turn it to start. So this is the wire that's gonna hook up directly to the starter. Technically, I'm gonna leave an extra amount of wire in there because when I get a shifter, I'll run it through a neutral safety switch to make sure it won't start while it's in gear. But that's the ignition harness. And now I have an ignition with all the powers and grounds, or well, all the power supply that I need to make everything work the way I want it to. So now that I have the ignition figured out and all wired, I'm gonna wire the engine. So what I have here is a red wire and a green wire. The green is gonna be my tach signal, and the red is gonna be ignition power from the key. So we're gonna run these directly to the distributor, and then I'm gonna run these in and tie them in there. The green's just gonna kind of hang out until I actually get a tach, because I don't think I have one right now. I may, but I don't have a tachometer that I know of. So I'll have to get one of those, but for right now, I'm gonna have the wire ran so that way it's all done and nice and clean. Well, now that I got the wiring hooked up to the distributor, now I have to get underneath it and try and get to the starter in order to hook the wire up that goes to the ignition switch. Probably should have ran this wire while I had this on a hoist the last time, but instead I'm gonna have to jack it up and get underneath it. So first thing we have to do is fill the airbags in the front, which I have these with some Schrader valves in them. So we should be able to lift the front end up here with the hose. Boy, this is a heavy front end. I really hope that these bags are big enough to get this front end off the ground. Because that one's pretty full and it didn't really want to lift there at all. I will be adding weight to the rear, which will definitely help take weight off the front, but there it goes. Wow, it's like binding. I don't know what that's about. Well, lifted the caddy up there, didn't it? I think it'll work. All right, we're gonna get underneath it here and lift. Oh, that noise was the airbags aren't all the way bolted into the control arms. I can see the bolt is actually kind of hanging out, which makes me think I should take some pressure out of those airbags before I just go and lift the front end off the ground. I'll probably have to re-lift it to get the jack back out, but I don't want a whole bunch of pressure on those bags with the bolts that are in them aren't tight. Which I should have did that too. But there we go. Alright. Bags are pretty deflated. I got the front end up in the air. Ooh, I don't want to drop that off the back. Yeah, hopefully this is how it looks when I hit the accelerator every time and I can just get the wheels to come right off the ground like that. I'll be really excited for that to actually happen. But we're gonna put some jack stands under it so it's safe and figure out that wiring. Okay, as you can see, this is my tachometer wire that'll go up to whatever gauge I decide to go with. And I left the yellow wire, which runs to the starter, long enough to hook up to whatever shifter I put in here for a neutral safety switch. Now I don't have the battery connected to the big lug, but when I turn the key, the solenoid on the starter should click if I did this right. And it doesn't. Am I getting power to that? I should be. I'm not getting power, I don't think. Hang on. Maybe I don't have power back on the booster pack. Hang on a second. It's supposed to have worked. All right, try it again. There it is. So yeah, I just had to have the jumper packed tight. So if I cut this wire and I put a neutral safety switch in the middle of it, that will not allow it to start. But for right now, everything should be wired and technically work. Well, I quick rigged up a battery. I can't find the terminal right now tonight, so I'll have to get one of those. Well, I'm actually gonna have to get 2 batteries for back here anyway. But I do have the cables connected. I've got it grounded. And all the wiring for the ignition, all the wiring for the ignition should work. Obviously, I'm not gonna check for spark right now, but I am gonna make sure it still cranks over, which should happen right now. Awesome. A little bit of fuel, and I think this thing will fire right up. So next step is I have to get the gas tank mounted back here, and I grabbed a roll of steel line. Actually, I'm gonna use this copper stuff because it's really easy to bend, and I'm gonna form a steel copper line that runs all the way up. This is actually like got nickel in it, so it works really well, and it won't rust. So I just tried fitting my fuel cell back in, and I remembered that it's very, very tight. It actually has to come in through the bottom. So I have to get this jacked way up in order to put the tank through there and then have it come up this way in order to sit on top of here. And then I have long bolts that are gonna bolt it in from this way, but it won't fit from the top down because the rails are too close. It doesn't fit. Instead of getting the gas tank mounted in here, I think I'm gonna run a fuel line back here, but then I'm gonna use some kind of temporary gas tank for the moment because I don't wanna have to put the tank in and then have to take it back out to finish welding. So I still have a bunch of welding to do back here, and I'd rather not have the gas tank in there. I know it fit from the bottom 100% because I already did stick it in there once, but it will not go through the top. And as I tried to put it in there, I remembered that. So gas tank is not going in at the moment, but I will run the fuel line so we can actually hear it start. Well, without the gas tank fitting as nice as I had hoped, and I don't have a couple other hoses for the fuel pump to even get hooked up and the radiator hose, I'm gonna dump a little gas in it just to see if we can actually get it to pop off again. Just to say, hey, the timing is working, and see if it'll start. So pour a little gas in it, see what happens here. Wow, fired right up, didn't it? That's gonna be pretty fun. Well, that sounds violent. Yeah, I need to get the radiator hoses on it so we can actually run this thing. Well, that'll be the next step.